Let's bring in our correspondent in Cuba, Ed Augustin, who's in Havana. So, Ed, what more can you tell us about what Cuban officials have been saying?
Well, the Cuban president, as you said, has denounced the attack and seeming kidnap of President Nicolas Maduro as a criminal act. He also characterized it as state terrorism, and he called on the international community to uphold international law. That's Miguel Diaz-Canel, the Cuban president. It's early here, but as a correspondent, my WhatsApp's been busy, and the government has said that it's announcing a rally at 10 o'clock local time outside the U.S. embassy to denounce the attack on Venezuela. And it's clear that this is very, very important for the Cuban government. Venezuela is among Cuba's main allies. Arguably, it's the main ally. You also have China, very economically important, and Russia, politically important to Cuba. But it's really been Venezuela over the last 25 years, certainly under Nicolas Maduro's predecessor, that's been hugely important and certainly in the early 2000s emerged as Cuba's main ally. Crucially, Venezuela supplies Cuba with crude oil, and that oil is used to keep the lights on, or at least what light that there still is on in Havana. So it's a hugely important ally in that sense, because keeping the power on is the most important issue from the government's point of view. Cubans, for years now, have been facing daily power cuts that can last for 12, 18 hours, sometimes in the provinces. So the spectre that the government could have been destabilized, or possibly, we'll see what happens in the coming hours, fall, would be a huge blow for Cuba. The other point is that the United States has been trying to overthrow, to a lesser or greater extent, depending on which regime, whether it's a Republican or Democratic administration, has been trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government for the last 25 years or so, starting in 2002. There's a long history of this. And after the first coup attempt against Hugo Chavez in 2002, Venezuela reached out to the Cubans and got closer, because the Cubans are very, very good at intelligence and personal security. It's been widely reported, unconfirmed, but widely reported, that Cuban intelligence and Cuban bodyguards were involved in the personal protection of Nicolas Maduro, who studied in Cuba. And if you read the New York Times right now, it's saying that in recent weeks, the Cuban security detail had got more and more involved. If that's true, it's a massive coup for the US intelligence against Cuban intelligence in managing to extract Nicolas Maduro, supposedly, according to US communications so far, without loss of life on the US side. So a huge piece of news here in Havana, especially because the US has its first ever Cuban-American as Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who has long made it a part of his political identity to call for regime change, not just in Caracas, but in Havana.
Ed, thank you very much for updating us there.